Good evening and welcome to week 6, my video discussion covering the topics of coaching and feedback. This is a really important topic to be covering, and unfortunately, coaching and feedback gets overlooked in education, and this might be due to traditional mindsets or educational beliefs that people hold. And focus traditionally has been on instruction. Um, and really, we want to start thinking about how can we make coaching and feedback more meaningful. Um, how many teachers can you think of can say that their last evaluative observation by the principal was a really meaningful experience and really promoted student growth? Probably not. I don't know many teachers that would say that, unfortunately. I hope things are shifting and more people do can say that. Um, but uh, that's where we want to go. If we're going to be doing observations and whatnot, we might as well make them meaningful and promote student learning. Um, so ultimately, with coaching and feedback, we really need to make that cultural shift from those traditional observations in the classroom um, to what are called formative walkthroughs. And we're going to talk in more detail about what the formative walkthroughs are. First off, the word formative ultimately is can be defined as contributing or something that contributes to improvement. In this case, we're talking about learning. So when we use the term formative, that's really where the roots come from. So formative contributes to improvement. Um, so before getting into the specifics, we're going to talk a little bit about um, what formative learning or classroom walkthroughs are not. Formative walkthroughs are not traditional observations, which I briefly talked about at the very beginning here. Um, and I referenced on this slide here, Big Brother is Watching in reference to George Orwell's 1984. Made me kind of think about that. Unfortunately, traditional observations or evaluations done by a principal can be viewed kind of negatively, and teachers, for some reason, can get a little bit of paranoid about having someone in their classroom observing them, and they might think of it as a gotcha moment by their administrator. Hopefully, the shift can move away from that. And I do understand where that comes from because there are punitive ramifications from summative evaluations, but those summative evaluations still can occur, but alongside should be these formative walkthroughs, which we'll get into. The traditional observations um, really focus on the teacher instruction and how to improve it. Like I said, it's kind of the trickle down approach to school improvement led by the principal. Um, Again, it has that whole supervisory approach. It uses a checklist of best practices or instructional strategies. And I said it can be perceived kind of negatively. Um, and we all know what this is. This is kind of, at least those who have been in teaching for a while, this is where someone comes in and the focus is on the teacher. Like, what is the teacher doing? Are they calling on the students? Are they making eye contact? Are they moving around the classroom using different proximity to students? Are they using visual aids to teach concepts? Um, what kind of language are they using? Are they using affective statements when dealing with more disruptive behavior? Uh, so traditionally, focus is really on the teaching strategies and the teaching instructional strategies teachers are applying in their classroom. And what needs to happen is the shift has to go towards more of the formative walkthroughs. And the formative classroom walkthroughs should be driven by the PLC process that we've been spending a lot of time on in this course here. So we really need to hold these concepts in the forefront of our minds when we're thinking about designing the most effective formative walkthrough that we can do for a teacher. And again, it all comes back to student learning. So this whole course has been really focused on student learning, um, and everything is geared towards that. So again, we need to think about what specifically do we expect our students to learn? How will we know when the student has learned what we expect? How will we respond when they are having difficulty learning? And how will we respond when students demonstrate what they have learned? We've covered many aspects of that already, but now we're going to look at, well, if we're keeping these questions in our mind in our teaching, uh, that should really guide us in what we look for when we're in a classroom evaluating learning. Um, so, formative classroom walkthroughs. What this really is it takes a shift off of watching the teacher or observing the teacher, and what the observer needs to do is view from the change your perspective from uh, to sitting in a student seat. Uh, what is going on through the student's eyes? That's really what you need to do during a formative classroom walkthrough. Um, what are students doing, saying, making, or writing during the lesson to master the concepts and skills they're supposed to be learning? And another question that you can think about is if you're a student and you're doing everything that the teacher is telling you to do or instructing you to do, what did I learn? What evidence do I have to show that the learning occurred? So that's really the shift that needs to happen. It's all from the viewpoint of the student. Um, so, formative classroom walkthroughs, we are using information gathered regarding student learning rather than collecting information about teacher instruction. Um, Moss and Brookhart, uh, they are great educational researchers and leaders in these formative walkthroughs, and they have provided 7 different look fors or indicators that an observer should be paying attention to if they're doing a formative um, walkthrough in a classroom. And I'm going to go through these 7 indicators that they, they suggest looking for. First one uh, is it a worthwhile lesson? Is the observed lesson part of a bigger picture? Um, is what the student is doing or being part of, is that tied to a standard curriculum, uh, all of that. So is it leading to or relating to a bigger picture? Uh, Indicator number 2, in the formative walkthrough, are you observing a shared learning target or you're looking for that? Do students know what they should be learning? Um, just stating a learning target that doesn't is not sufficient. What Moss and Brookhart suggest is that it needs to be referenced a lot, um, and students are really aiming towards this. And it's very obvious during the observation or the walkthrough that this is occurring, and that everyone's on the same page, knowing the direction of the lesson. So the learning target is made very clear. It's not just put off in the little corner on the whiteboard or smartboard, but it's something that's shared and communicated and referenced frequently. Indicator number 3 is is there a performance of understanding? And this is where the observer really needs to focus on what students say, write, create, share, etc. And do all of these things point towards the learning targets? Indicator number 2. Uh, so again, we're focusing really on the students. Um, and indicator number 4, are there student look fors? Meaning, um, are there rubrics shared with the students? Do they know what success looks like? Ultimately, this is what indicator 4 is. Do the students know what success looks like? Again, if the learning targets are shared, if there's an understanding of what they need to be doing, this indicator number 4 should be there. Students know what the success is. What is the criteria? Is it a rubric? What is that? And number 5, is formative feedback present? Do students know their progress towards their learning targets? Uh, do the students know where they are and where they need to go in regards to their learning? And again, we covered a lot of the formative assessments the teachers can apply. And this should be that back and forth between the student and the teacher. And it's that real time measure of student learning. So is that occurring? Um, an example of this could be, teachers using the exit slips we talked about. Like, where's your learning at now, and what do you need to do next? Could be one simple way that shows that this indicator is evident. Um, and this is where you start thinking about the students saying, "What I can do this," or "I need to do this," rather than the teacher telling students, "You need to do this." So again, focus turns to the student. Number 6, an formative walkthrough. Another indicator is student self-assessment. Is this occurring? Uh, and again, that kind of ties into the previous one, the formative assessments. But are they taking charge of this and doing it on their own? Again, it's that shift from the teacher to the student. And lastly, number 7, a good indicator of in a formative classroom is there effective questioning, and this effective questioning should really be driving students into more conversation during the class. Students are leading the discussions. Perhaps there's debating going on. So the discourse is really guided by the students and not the teachers. Of course, the teachers can use questioning techniques to prompt that, but hopefully the shift happens to where students are leading that discussion. Um, and this really shows that students are being engaged in their learning. Uh, so those are the 7 indicators to look for in a formative walkthrough. Again, this is very different than the traditional observation where we're focusing on what the teacher is doing. Those formats, you could have the best instructional strategies happening, but if student learning is not occurring, those instructional strategies are really meaningless. So it really turns the whole uh, shift in observations upside down and turns it towards students. So at the end here, I just want to talk a little bit about how formative walkthroughs can really nurture professional growth. Um, and this can be done through professional development, using professional learning communities, all of that. Then again, in doing this, promoting professional growth, we really want to reiterate the PLC framework that focuses on those 4 questions that we talked about. Again, focuses on student learning. Um, and in leading teachers into this whole shift into formative walkthroughs rather than traditional observations, uh, the groundwork should be already laid. Um, there should be that whole foundational schema already uh, already provided through professional development around um, you know, focusing on the instructional cycles, instruction, the assessment piece, grading, intervention pieces, all of those that work towards those 4 questions of the PLC. So when it comes to starting to discuss formative walkthroughs, that should come a little bit more naturally if proper preparation has happened. And again, creating kind of that sense of urgency that we really need to shift on student learning. I think right now we could really use the pandemic as an example too. I think unfortunately a lot of is pointing to student learning maybe is not happening as much as it was prior to distant learning and in-person classes and whatnot, which is really tragic. But that could be used as a way to promote this shift in observations. Uh, we want to look at what students are doing. For example, traditional teaching that might happen in brick and mortar buildings. Those models probably aren't working right now with distant learning. Um, so again, our students learning, and that should be what's driving what we're doing. Um, and as a leader, you want to raise questions and challenge those existing belief systems and underlying assumptions teachers may have, um, and challenge them and present alternatives, such as formative walkthroughs and all the ideas of the PLCs we've been covering in this class. And you want to nourish that collaborative inquiry. Um, Focus on the evidence of learning gathered from walkthroughs that can really help educators navigate the complex waters of teaching and reframe possibilities for students and teachers. Again, this really provides meaningful information and evidence, and it gives teachers really something to digest and to adjust and to move in another direction to promote greater learning and ultimately student achievement. And lastly, to accomplish shifting from more of the traditional formats to the formative walkthroughs, leaders need to provide time for professional development and PLCs to address this. One thing I would encourage doing is using um, the 7 indicators that Moss and Brookhart suggest and have teachers go into other teachers' classrooms and observe a lesson and really focus on the students. Are you seeing those 7 indicators that Moss and Brookhart suggest should be occurring? And that could provide some very good dialogue and professional growth. So, all in all, feedback is very important for teachers. Without it, I don't think there really can be professional growth. So, formative classroom walkthroughs are one uh, huge way that teachers can be impacted positively to shape what they're doing to enhance student learning. And that brings us to the end. And here are my references. Thank you, and I hope you all have a good rest of the week. Good night.